Tonight I'm going to be preaching in 2 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter. 2 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter. If you notice that people, have you heard the term, somebody's two-faced? Well, there's a, you know what, we all are a little bit two-faced. We have a, there is the part, in other words, we're not exactly like we don't see ourselves like other people see us. You know, there's differences of opinion about that. And so tonight I'm going to be talking about what is the kind of face that we want God to see, not the face we present to the public, or I get tickled at people. We live in a time, when it's a horrible thing to ever take a nap or rest, because we live in a culture that values work. And so I knew this guy. You call him 3 o'clock in the morning and say, "Well, you sleep?" He said, "Oh no, I wasn't sleeping. I was down in the basement doing push-ups and praying." Because we want to present a persona to the world that's positive. We want people to think we're really okay or fine people or whatever. But there's also the true us, and often we don't share that. Sometimes we don't realize who we really are. And tonight I'm going to be talking about that. I'm going to call this sermon "Taking Off the Veil." I love to do weddings. Well, that's kind of a lie. I don't love to do them. But in fact, I hate weddings. I'd rather do a funeral. But anyway, my favorite part of a wedding is, when they have the formal bride, she'll take the veil off, and then the husband will get to kiss her, and oh, it's so sweet. Everybody goes, swoons, and now the Muslim women, they wear that, what do they call that? Burqa. They wear burqa. And, if you're a real ugly woman, you might want to think about being a Muslim. You could slip out there. You could kind of hide in them. And I better leave that alone. I may have gone too far on that. It's a shame some of the men can't wear one of these. Now, a veil hides the face. It hides that face from, and women don't want to be seen in public. A Muslim woman, in certain sects of Muslim women, don't want to be seen in public without a veil. But a veil separates us and hides us, from the real world. Rebecca veiled her face from Isaac in the Old Testament when she saw him the first time, and Isaiah asked God to veil the hearts of the Babylonians. He said, hide their hearts, so that they won't know what they're doing. And now in the temple in Jerusalem, there is this huge veil that separates the Holy of Holies from the regular other part of the temple. And that veil separates the two. It hides the Ark of the Covenant and those other things from just the regular worshipers. So there's a lot of this that we understand veils, and we understand, being two-faced, and we understand that. So tonight we're going to talk about that and try to give a little insight into our lives and help us to be the kind of people that we want God to see the real us, but with that real us, we want to make that work. We want to be what God wants us to be and not pretending. Now, Paul, here in this chapter, is talking to the Corinthian people, and they were hiding behind a veil of legalism and traditions. Now, these Christians here in Corinth, they were converting to Christianity, and they were coming from Judaism and from other paganisms, and they were trying to slip into Christianity and bring with it all those old traditions and those legalisms. And as folks, I don't know if you figured this out or not, but Christ and the Christian faith is all about grace, and we're not about legalism. Now, we've talked about this a lot, but we don't earn our way into heaven. We get to go into heaven by grace. And whenever Jesus comes into our heart and changes us, then we want to do good stuff, but we don't do good stuff to get to heaven. As long as we got that straight. So law versus grace is the big debate that's going on here in the 2 Corinthian letter. They're discussing that, and how a person should see this. And I believe that today in our world, Satan has blinded a lot of people's eyes. He's put a veil over lots of people, us too. He's hiding the truth from us. And we need to ask God to clear us up and let us have good vision. But no matter how good your veil is, no matter how opaque it is and how obscure it hides you, I want you to know one thing. God can see behind your mask. He knows who you really are. Not just who you want people to think you are, but He sees who you really are. One of these days, when we stand before Him in eternity, He will lift our veil. He will lift our veil. The bride, the church, when we come in, the groom of heaven will lift our veil, and He will see who we really are. What a beautiful picture. And when you think about your people going home to be with the Lord, think about that. God lifting that veil and looking into their very heart. Now, when Jesus lifts my veil, or when He lifts yours, when we get to heaven, what do we want Him to see? What do we want God to say about us? And let's jump in there at about the 13th verse and see if we can pick out a few of the things here that deal with this and find out what we want God to see. You ready for 13? 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 13. We're not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face to keep the Israelites from gazing at it while the radiance was fading away. I say, what are you talking about? Okay, well, let's go back to the Exodus. Now, Moses is bringing the children of Israel across the Sinai Peninsula, out in the desert, high desert. It's cold at night. It's hot in the day. It's dry. It's as dry as most of the sermons you get to hear at the Calvary Church. It's dry. And so Moses was trying to lead the people across, and God called Moses. He said, Moses, I want you to come up here. I want to talk to you. Moses went up on Mount Sinai and talked to the Lord face to face. And after that experience, when Moses saw God, Moses had a supernatural glow that radiated from his face. He'd been in the presence of God, and that Shekinah glory of God was radiating from Moses' face. So when he came back down from the mountain with God, he glowed. Man, he was shining. You couldn't sleep in a room with him because it'd be light all night. He was shining. Now, over time, over a matter of days, weeks, months, we're not exactly sure, the glory of God began to fade just a little bit from Moses' face. A little bit, and a little bit more. And pretty soon, Moses looked in the mirror one morning and there wasn't much shining out of his face. So what did he do? He put a veil over his face so the people would not see that the glory of God was not shining in his life anymore. So that's what we're referring to here in the 13th verse. It says, we are not like Moses who put a veil over his face. Now the reason Moses did that was he wanted to hide from people the idea that the glory was not shining any longer. And that's a horrible thing to face in your own life when you realize, and you've been walking with the Lord, you've been on a mountaintop, you've experienced the glory of God, and you've just felt His presence, and then life just begins to turn that off and throw paint on this and hide it and put it all under cover. And sometimes then we just get down so low, we're not shining for God anymore. And boy, that's not how we want to be. So, when Jesus lifts my veil, and He lifts your veil, I want Him to see a shining glory, don't you? I want God to see a face that's shining, not just a face, but a life that's shining for the glory of God. I remember one time years ago, I took my grandkids to the circus. And they were little at that time, and that usually tells you how long ago that was, but they were little, and they came around selling those little, I don't know what they call them, they're little tubes of light. You ever seen them? And boy, they were so excited. They had to have them. They had to have one of those because that was the most important thing. And so Papaw bought them, That's what Papaws do. So Papaw bought them little kids some of those little things. And they were just waving them around, laughing about. And the next morning though, the glory kind of departed from them. And they wasn't near as much fun after that. Now some people don't want to see that the light's going out in your eyes and in your heart and your life. And we sure don't want Jesus to see that. So whenever He lifts our face, or our veil, folks, we want our face to shine with the radiance, the Shekinah glory of God. So that's how we want to live. Now, the next thing, as I think about this, we're going to start in verse 14 here, is there's another thing that we want God to know about us, and that is we want Him to see in our lives a mind that's awake and learning about Him. You know, we have a tendency to, go to sleep on our journey. Talked about this a little bit Sunday and embarrassing folks about sleeping in church, No, we didn't. But like the little girl, she woke up in the middle of the night. She'd cry, Mommy, come in here. Mommy came in. She says, honey, what happened? She said, I fell out of bed. Well, honey, why did you fall out of bed? And she said, well, Mommy, I guess I went to sleep too close to where I got in. And a lot of people go to sleep too close to where they get in the faith. They get comfortable and they go to sleep. They turn their mind off and they stop growing. They stop praying. They stop reading their Bible. They stop trying to understand and know God. Well, let's see what we're supposed to do with our minds here in the 14th verse. But their minds were made dull, for to this day the same veil, when the old covenant is read, it has not been removed, because only in Christ is it taken away. Even to this day, when Moses is read, a veil covers their face. But whenever anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. Now this is simply saying that these Jewish people here in Corinth, when they came into the church and they tried to bring all their old traditions, they didn't understand the teachings of Moses in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They didn't understand those first 5 books of the Bible. That was all they had. And they thought that Moses was all he was teaching was legalism. They didn't understand that it was about grace. And so they had a veil over their face, and their minds couldn't accept the idea of grace. They simply couldn't get around it. So they stopped reading the Word. They read it and they heard it read, but they stopped letting it into their minds. They wanted information. They didn't want to be confused with the facts. They wanted to keep up with their traditions. They didn't want to learn a new thing. And the new thing was, of course, that God is grace. All about grace. And sadly, a lot of people today are like that. They don't want to be confused with the truth, because they've already got their mind made up. And some of you have come here tonight. Maybe you've already got your mind made up, and you think, well, listen, I want you to open your heart tonight. Don't just open it to anything, but open it to the Lord. You say, God, do you need to show me a new thing? Do you need to teach me about me? Do you need to take my veil off and let me see me? And I'm saying, yeah, He does. They don't want to be confused with the facts. Now, if a policeman pulls you over, all he cares about is the facts. Right? That's all he cares about. You'll say, well, sir, I didn't know I was supposed to go slow here. He says, I don't care what you don't know. The law is. But see, we're not into that. They don't care. But we need to just trust the Lord and open our hearts. Now, so this argument that's going on here in this church between grace and works, it takes an open heart for you to accept that. You see, it goes against human nature. Human nature says, I've got to earn it so I can have it. Everything, I've got to work so I'll get paid. In other words, it's I've got to cause and effect. I've got to make it happen before I get it. And we think that's the same way with our faith in Jesus. And it isn't. He's all about grace. And so a faded glory and a closed mind are not good things, but the next one is really good. Now let's talk about this third one in verse 17. Here in this, I see that it's a soul set free. When God lifts our veil, He wants us to see a soul that's set free from the traditions of the world, from the cares of the world, from legalism, set free to receive the grace and the glory of God. Let's read the 17th verse. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Freedom. See, when God comes into our life, He sets us free. Now, men will preach religion to you, and we'll try to put you under bondage. It's just human nature. We'll say, well, you got to do this, you got to do that, but where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. Freedom. Thank you, Jesus, for that. So Paul wanted so much for these beloved people here in Corinth to be free from the law. He wanted the law to be written in their hearts and not, in other words, written on their minds, written inside them, and not having to just make it work externally, but let it come from the inside of them. Now, I don't know how many farm dogs I've had through the years. I've had several farm dogs. By the way, my Rosie Jones got her a new dog this week. Rosie's my 2-year-old granddaughter. She told her Sunday school teacher Sunday morning down at the church where my daughter is the music worship leader. She told her Sunday school teacher, she said, I'm going to go get me a big fat puppy. And his name is Miko. She, 2 years old, came up with this name. We have no idea where. And so she's named her dog Miko. Anyway, but we've had lots of farm dogs. We're dog people. And they love to ride in my back of my pickup. My dogs just love to ride. I don't know why they do that. And I had this one dog one time that I was bragging to everybody about how it would go with me to Walmart or Race Brothers or wherever, and it would stay in the truck and never get out for anything. And one day I came out of Race Brothers and looked out there, and my dog wasn't in my truck. But he was in another truck, 2 or 3 over, sitting there in the back. Now, my dogs don't know that the rules are stay in the truck so you'll be safe. You won't get run over. But they don't understand. They're not interested in the rules and laws. They want freedom. So that's why anyway. So we have the Lord and the Spirit of the Lord inside us. And when God is in you, you are truly free indeed. We are the freest people on the planet. Those who love the Lord, those that Jesus lives inside, we are the freest that you can be. So if you tonight are in bondage to something or something, and you want freedom, give your life to Jesus. Let Him come on the inside, because where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about tonight, and I know, don't applaud when I say the last thing, is when Jesus lifts my veil, what do I want Him to see? Well, I've told you 3 things. But this 4th one, I believe, is the truly dream of every believer's heart. And that is when He lifts my veil, I want him to see a reflection of himself. I want Jesus to see Jesus in me when He lifts my veil. Let's read verse 18. And we who with unveiled faces all reflect the Lord's glory are being transformed into His likeness with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Oh, to be like Jesus. My papa passed away a couple of years ago. Many of you knew him. And I used to just beam with joy when somebody would say, you look like your dad. That was the highest praise I could ever get, just to somebody tell me, you look like your dad. I just throw my shoulders back, just grin, because I wanted to be like my daddy. And somebody once in a while would say about my grandkids, well, you look like your grandpa. And I like that. But see, we want to reflect Jesus out of our life. When people see you, you want them to see Him, not you. See, we must decrease and let Him increase in our life. And see, the more you decrease and let Him increase, the more you look like Him, the more you act like Him. But you see, you can reverse that too. I am crucified with Christ, yet I live. So I want people, but I won't want anything else. I want the Lord to see a reflection. I want Him to just look into a mirror when He lifts my veil to see His heart. Now, the wedding supper of the Lamb will be for those who have lifted their veils and presented a reflection of the Lamb. That's who's going to be there. We're going to be seated in a room full of people who all look like Jesus, who've learned to be like Him, have learned to live like Him. So make it your goal to keep growing, keep learning, seek freedom in grace, and truly let that all work in you to shine, shine, shine with the glory of God. And I want you all to just look like Jesus. That's what we want to look like.